My name is Alan Friedman, Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I am again your MC for this evening. Also visible on your screens are David Adler, President of the AJA, and Ted Lapkin, our Executive Director. So good evening to you as well as to our guests for tonight, who we will introduce in a moment. Tonight's format will consist of a 10-minute video on UNRWA's involvement in the Palestinian school curriculum, after which we will have some discussion and then open up the forum with a live Q&A session from the audience. The chat function is available as usual, so feel free to send messages. If you click on the little chat icon in the middle of the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen, that will open up the chat window. We've got everybody muted at this point to prevent any annoying noises during the first part of the session, but we will allow people to unmute themselves for question time. So at this point, I will hand over to David Adler, and he can introduce our guests, and we'll make a start to the evening. David?
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. And we're dealing with a very important subject tonight, which is UNRWA. And Australia is one of the significant contributors to UNRWA, and there's some work to be done in terms of political advocacy. We're going to start with a movie, 10 minutes, that David Bedein and his team have made. So without further ado, it commences now.
The new U.S. peace plan for the Middle East demands an end to incitement and violence.
And the president did something unique. He recognized basically the conditions on the ground, recognized reality, that in order for these two groups to live in peace, there's going to have to be some give and take here. And one of those pieces of the give is to understand you cannot continue down the road of indoctrination if there's going to be any peace in the region. That just makes sense. And so that's what the president wants to ensure happens to protect the people of Israel.
72 years after the Arab-Israeli War, 5 million descendants of Arab refugees from 1948 still dwell in the squalor of 59 refugee camps. The camps are run by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The residents are indoctrinated with the notion that they have the right to return to villages that existed before 1948. This is a core principle of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization.
لازم نقاومهم ونرجع أراضينا.
نرجع على أراضينا المحتلة في 48 اللد وعكا ويافا والآخر.
حق العودة إنه نرجع بلادنا زي ما شردونا الاحتلال بقوة من أرضنا، فلازم إحنا نطلعهم زي ما طلعونا بقوة.
لن ندخل عن حق العودة ولن نرضى بأي وطن بديل وبأي عاصمة غير القدس الشريف. سنعود إلى ديارنا.
لكن نجي بنقعدهم إنه أنت إيش بلدك إيش بلدك إيش بلدك. الأطفال اللي بيتعرفوا على كذا بلد، مش أنا بس القدس، لا أنا وطني فلسطين في كذا مدينة. يعني في بصير انتماء أكثر للطفل. يعني بصير الأطفال هنا يعني إحنا ما بيخلي يعني حتى الآن صار الولد عند الطفل أو البنت إنه صارت كثير على بلدها الأصل.
أنا بشوف كل ما يمر يوم على النكبة وعلى التغيير كل اقترب موعد العودة إن شاء الله. العودة ولا بديل ولا بديل ولا بديل.
ثقافة حق العودة أكيد نركز عليها كثيرا، وأكيد هذا هو جزء لا يتجزأ من ثقافة مناهجنا الدراسية. نعطيهم نوصل هاي المعلومات لطلابنا في مدارسنا عن طريق مواد التربية المدنية والتربية الوطنية.
السلام عليكم. بدي أسألكم من وين أنتم أصلكم؟ من أي بلد؟ بعدين بنحكي عن النكبة شوي. تفضل. من أي بلد؟
من فلسطين. احنا من حيفا.
من حيفا.
من يافا. من قضا يافا بيت دجن.
بيت دجن.
يافا قضا يافا. راجع بلادي راجع بلادي أنا ولادي على أرض الأقصى راجع بلادي يا
يا محلى القعدة يا محلى القعدة في حكورتنا يا محلى القعدة ما بنسى وعدة ما بنسى وعدة نرجع أرضنا ما بنسى وعدة.
Because of the antithetical culture of UNRWA, Arab refugees remain in the camps. UNRWA provides health, education, and health services. At the same time, it promotes an ideology that perpetuates war, encouraging residents to remain in their homes until they can conquer Israel and create a new country of Palestine. For decades, the United States was the lead donor to UNRWA, paying for about half its $1.2 billion budget. The U.S. stopped funding UNRWA last year after it determined that American tax dollars had been used to prolong the suffering of yet another generation of refugees. Within UNRWA schools, peace is never discussed. Instead, war is taught daily in prose and in songs.
لا مش حيصير بيننا احنا وإسرائيل لأنه شردونا وقتلونا.
انه الاحتلال يعرف انه احنا انه هاي الارض إلنا ومش إلهم، انه يعني هاي مش ارض بلا شعب، هاي ارض عليها شعب فلسطين.
فيش سلام بيننا وبين إسرائيل لأنه بخربوا حقوق الفلسطينية إنهم يرجعوا لبلادهم. أكيد لا، لأنه إحنا لا بنعرفهم ولا هم بيعرفونا.
مش راح يكون سلام بينه وبين إسرائيل لأنه إسرائيل هي عدوتنا.
وأنا بحب أرجع على كفر قاسم غصبا عن اليهود وأنتصر على اليهود. هم مجموعة من الكفار والناصرة ولا بيحبوا الله ولا بيعبدوا الله وبكرهونا.
نحن الثورة والغضب، نحن من الأجيال من هون من عنا انكتب تاريخ الأبطال. نحن الثورة والغضب، نحن من الأجيال من هون من عنا انكتب تاريخ الأبطال.
ولما أمي الاختيارة الصبح نادت عالجارة وتلاجا الحجارة تنرشك عالدورية تنرشك عالدورية.
فلسطين شبيحة بضلهم عنا فلسطين الحرة، هنرجع بلادنا لازم نهجم عليهم.
قول إن شاء الله سنة وراح نحررها، لازم نحررهم عشان نرجع أرضنا.
لازم نقاومهم ونرجع أرضنا اللي أخذوها منا. هاي لما طلعونا منها بالقوة، إحنا لازم نطلعهم من بلادها بالقوة وغصب عنهم راح يطلعوا. مش راح تضل فلسطين إسرائيل في فلسطين، لأنه فلسطين مش للبيع والقدس مش للبيع، راح تضلها إلنا. القدس عاصمة فلسطين الأبدية.
نحاربهم ونقاومهم يعني بأكتر إشي بنقدر نعمله.
في القرآن الكريم مكتوب إنه زوال إسرائيل راح يتم على يد الفلسطينيين.
At UNRWA schools, education is not limited to texts and is not confined to the classroom. Inside schoolyards, students pass by violent graffiti that glorifies killers. One of the Palestinian heroes is Dalal Mughrabi, whose image adorns alleyways near UNRWA schools and neighborhoods. In 1978, she led a terror gang that commandeered a bus and murdered 38 passengers, including 13 children. On the paths of UNRWA camps, children speak about Mughrabi with awe and reverence.
صور شهداء سووا عملية، الناس سووا عملية لأجل الوطن. يعني دلال المغربي سوت عملية تفجير وفجرت حالها عند جيش.
يعني زي أختي وأمي بنت بلدي.
دلال المغربي هي شهيدة فلسطينية شردت فرقت اليهود وهجرتهم.
دلال المغرب أول شهيدة فلسطينية فجرت من الجيش الإسرائيلي، يعني سوت عملية استشهادية.
UNRWA schools portray Mughrabi as a role model. In its current curriculum, Mughrabi's photo appears in a study book for third graders. It is a key lesson in Our Beautiful Language, a new textbook issued in 2019. On page 63, pupils learn to chant the land of the nobles. The assignment calls for kids to liberate Palestine and to exterminate the current residents of Israel, the Jews. Here they chant the song. Their lethal melodies do not resonate just in the classroom. Here, a teacher leads the same war song during a field trip as children prepare for the liberation of Palestine with toy guns.
وأزيل الغاصب من بلدي وأبيد فلول الغرباء يا بلد الأقصى والحرم النخوة والكرم صبرا صبرا فالنصر لنا والفجر يطل من الظلم فمن سأضحي بدمائي
Hold on.
يا أرض
Comes on every now and then, but her earphone thing is just full of gunk. I think the phone thinks the earphones are in.
When we visited UNRWA schools, we found students eager to deny the existence of Israel or any Jewish connection to the land.
طب ايش اتعلمت عن اسرائيل؟
انهم كلاب بخضر وفيش بعدين اشي اسمه اسرائيل.
هل ممكن اسرائيل تضل هون في فلسطين؟
لا، بنهجرهم من هون. تعلمنا انه احنا لازم ما نخليش ارضنا لحد بنعرفهم مش، لازم ما نسكتش عن حق. فيش اشي اسمه اسرائيل لانه احنا اسمها دولة اسرائيل. احنا بس فلسطين إلنا. مستقبل القدس إن شاء الله راح تكون إلنا. أكيد على أكيد وفيش لا إسرائيل ولا إشي اسمه إسرائيل.
Given America's new insistence that Palestinians eliminate incitement and violence, perhaps more UNRWA donor countries will ask why they allow millions to live as refugees in perpetuity.
Wow. Okay. That's a very confronting video. David Adler and I will ask a few questions for a few minutes, and then we'll hand it over to the group. I'll start by asking David Bedein, and the others can chime in as you wish. The Palestinian school curriculum begins, as it happens, this weekend, and it really looks as if we're just going to start the whole cycle again. What thoughts come to mind for you at this time?
The most important thing is we, with the permission of Yasser Arafat, got a hold of the school books when they came out. Having Palestinian school books was supposed to be the panacea of the peace process. The fact that they would do their own books. And for the last 20 years, you'll meet the men, Dr. Groiss, Dr. Arnon Groiss, who's been through all of them. We also have Arabs checking his work to just make sure that they're clear. And there's a message. The message is to prepare the children for war against the Jews. And it's gotten stronger. And this coming Saturday, on August 8th, the school curriculum is being renewed, first and foremost in Gaza. And the most important thing to understand is that these school books and this curriculum is being paid for by the donor nations. And since Australia is one of those donor nations, you have a responsibility. How do we know that, by the way? Our staff met 5 times with the office, the staff of Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. And he made it clear that the only ones who can intervene to stop this this curriculum are the people paying for it. That's why we go to the parliaments. Now, because of the current corona situation, we're not traveling. We want to go to the parliaments of each of the 20 nations. And that's why we're speaking to you today. It's with the hope that the mainstream media and the mainstream of the parliaments will look at this and say, why are we paying for this? And why not put the money into escrow until there's a change?
David, just before I hand over to the other David, I mean, clearly this continues to go on with the approval of the parents of these kids. And I guess these kids grow up and become parents themselves, and then the same thing happens. And what about the teachers? I mean, are they really, they're involved also? I imagine they're political activists also.
Well, that's a very good question. And what we have done has been to hire a team to follow those who are elected to run the UNRWA Workers Union in Gaza and the Workers Teachers Union in Gaza, and the Hamas slate wins. So it's the Hamas is not only providing the school books, which are provided by the Palestinian Authority, and as I mentioned, paid for by the donor nations, but the most important thing to understand, the teachers come out of Hamas directly. Now, Hamas being recognized by the UN and by Australia, Great Britain, US, and Canada as a terrorist organization, they basically don't have a right to teach. And anyone who would challenge that with the UN would be at least would be an open door for inquiry.
Okay. I'd like to direct a question to Arnon, because you've actually done the work to go through all the teaching content. Can you give those that have tuned in an idea of the sort of things that you've found in the UNRWA textbooks, in the books that are used in the UNRWA schools?
Yes, there are three fundamentals established by the PA back in 2000 as follows. First of all, the legitimization of the existence of the State of Israel and the very presence of its Jewish citizens in this country, including the total denial of the existence of the holy places there. The second fundamental is demonization of both Israel. It is the source of all evil, and also of the Jews, who are presented as enemies of Islam from its very beginning. The third fundamental is the total absence of any discussion of peace with Israel, and instead you find advocacy for war of liberation, including Israel before 67 borders, and which are considered territories occupied in 1948. Into this war effort, there are some religious elements introduced, like jihad, shahada, martyrdom, and the need to liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque, and also terror is part and parcel of this liberation struggle, including the coastal highway of Israel in 1978 with Dalal al-Mughrabi, and hijacking of civilian aircrafts and so on and so on. And the final goal is elimination, in one way or another, of the Jewish population living in this country.
So it's got a religious element to it, that it's a duty to become a jihadist, even a shahid, as taught in the UNRWA schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there is one special emphasis put in UNRWA schools on the issue of the return, because there are refugees, so-called refugees, and should return. So the issue of return is emphasized in UNRWA schools.
Okay.
And the return is not peaceful; it's a part and parcel of the war. And they return to liberated Palestine, not to live peacefully with Israelis.
Arnon, I'm just wondering, when did this whole indoctrination process start? Because often we think about 1967 as being the time when the Palestinian Arabs decided that they were an indigenous people that had been colonized by the invading Jews. So did this start pre-67?
Yes. The books which we found in 67 in both the West Bank, the Jordanian books, and in Gaza, the Egyptian books, follow the same line. And under Israeli administration, the books were censored. I mean, they used the same books, but censored, and all the anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli and anti-peace elements were taken out of the books. And this sort of situation continued until 1994, when the Palestinian Authority took over the educational system, and it reintroduced all the books. And then in 2000, it issued its own books, which follow the same line.
David?
Yeah, I want to follow up on something that David Bedein said about the influence of Hamas. And we've seen some evidence of that. Now, David, I understand that Hamas has secured control of the unions, the teachers' union in particular. Does that just apply to the schools in Gaza, or does it also apply to the schools in the areas administered by the Palestinian Authority?
The areas in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, the unions are divided between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the PLO. That doesn't mean that they're better. It's just a more clear situation, since there are those in Israel and abroad who do not define the PLO at this point as a terror organization because of the negotiation with them. It's a clearer situation in Gaza, and the opportunity we have, and I look at it as an opportunity, the fact that they're opening up their schools this weekend only in Gaza, that means that the donor nations don't have there's no wiggle room, no way out of it. It's very clear. Hamas-controlled school system is in place in Gaza, and if donor nations were to raise questions, I think that would be appropriate.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Hamas also appoint the religious supervisors in the schools, those that teach the religious subjects, or at least oversee them, Hamas nominees, aren't they?
Well, Hamas used to issue additional books. All the books which I read, which were issued by the Palestinian Authority, are mandatory in all Palestinian regions, including Gaza, because the graduates of these schools should otherwise not be able to proceed in Arab universities. So Hamas is bound to teach according to these books, and also UNRWA in both the West Bank and in Gaza. And Hamas used to issue additional books, which were more, I would say, extremist in approach, and more anti-Semitic. I saw them in 2013, and they were taught in UNRWA schools, and the children were examined and tested on these books in UNRWA schools, according to internet sites which I saw at that time. I haven't checked since 2013 what's the situation right now regarding the Hamas additional books, but the PA books are used all the time.
Yeah.
David, one of the things alluded to in your short film were the sort of extracurricular activities. Now, there are paramilitary camps run for some of these kids. Is the recruiting actually done in UNRWA schools? Do you have any evidence of that?
You'll look at our website, israelbehindthenews.com. I suggest that you host that site on this program for people to see. We have hired professionals to conduct studies of the informal curriculum that the children learn in the UNRWA schools and in what they call al-Qutla clubs, where the ideology is promoted and where the kids have practical training in getting ready for war. Incidentally, that practical training, we don't have it in this film, But in Gaza, in the UNRWA schools in Gaza, we have made 4 films where we show military with live weapons. Same one came up to me yesterday and challenged me, and that he said that couldn't possibly be. Well, you look at the links of our films, and it's right there. You can see it. The former UNRWA spokesman tried to say that we hired the children. I said, well, we couldn't afford the guns for them, but it's a kind of in a humorous way. That's how they try to respond. But that is recruited in the schools. If your ambassador in the Australian ambassador were to ask about that, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, David Bedein, can I just take you back a step? In the movie, it was mentioned that the United States has ceased funding or their contribution. So that then raises the question, who is funding UNRWA? And it also carries an implication that if they know where their money is going and what it's doing, they, by implication, are complicit in what's being presented. So who are the countries that are really the culprits here?
You will see on our website, israelbehindthenews.com, a special URL that says "Who funds UNRWA," which is taken off the UNRWA site. The leading funder today of UNRWA is Germany, followed by the UK, the European Union, Sweden, and Qatar. You'll see all of the leading 20 nations there. Now, UNRWA has a very powerful PR firm working for it, which convinces donor nations that they have a peace curriculum. So in the United States, you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from there, the US Congress hired a team of investigators to say who's lying, us or them. And they decide, and the GAO report, which was issued, showed that they were lying. There is no peace curriculum being taught, and various officials of the State Department were as a result removed. So again, it's not me saying it. The GAO, which is the most important objective source for finding out what's really going on. So the GAO report shows exactly what is happening, but the donor nations are all being approached by very slick PR firms to try to convince them that there's a peace curriculum. By the way, if there was a peace curriculum, I would be very popular. I would get a Nobel Peace Prize for showing it. On the other hand, I don't work for Walt Disney. I work for an independent news operation.
But David, these countries, UK and Germany, I mean, they're not stupid people. I mean, they can see what's going on. So even if some PR firm walks in their offices and says, this is all a peace process, I mean, what, they just buy all of this, do they?
Alan, it's a very sophisticated misinformation program. UNRWA marches children who seem to be innocuous, friendly, peaceful, on a regular basis to all of their consuls to make performances, to show plays, to show that they are peaceful, as I mentioned, and they do a convincing job. If we hadn't done this research, if we hadn't engaged Dr. Groiss and 3 other professionals to do this work, we would believe it too, because it's very convincing. On the other, a lie repeated often enough becomes believable. Who said that?
David?
I think Arnon wanted to add something. I saw him put his hand up. Arnon, did you want to add something at that stage? Okay, I want to ask either of our guests a couple of firstly, roughly how many UNRWA schools are we talking about, and can you comment on their distribution? And there are some, I understand, that are within Israel-administered areas. Why does Israel allow this? So they're my 2 questions.
Our other guest, who is not here, I don't know what happened there. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem would be most qualified to comment on that. But basically, they got used to the fact that the Shuafat camp, which is in the municipality of Jerusalem, continues. I don't have this. I'm sorry, I don't have the stats on how many UNRWA schools there are. I will put that on my site this evening so everyone will see. I can just have a little bit of research. I'll push a few buttons. That's fine. But you have schools in Gaza, Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Now, in addition to that, also runs schools in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. who follow the curricula of those countries.
Sure.
We're dealing with the curricula of the Palestinian Authority, which applies to Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, and Gaza.
I may add that UNRWA is responsible for about a quarter, about 250,000 children, education of children among the Palestinian population. Overall, in the Middle East, it is responsible, as far as I remember, for the education of 500,000 students in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and as I said, in the Palestinian areas. And it's about 97 schools in the West Bank, about 250 schools in Gaza. And I mean, it's quite a factor in Palestinian education.
Factor is absolutely the right word. I mean, in addition to the other end where we have the PA paying terrorists, we have the education system that you're describing, which is the factory for potential terrorists. And it has an enormous impact on the kids. We've seen your evidence and you've been putting it out for a long time now, David, and it's very convincing.
Yeah,
we have to continue doing it. It's very important because the misinformation, our next goal is to put out a series of films in the German language, because Germany has become the most important element. And then not only does the German government put in $180 million, but there's 34 German NGOs helping with the education system. You can draw your own conclusions about Germany's legacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to add something, if possible, if I may.
Go ahead.
UNRWA defies its mandate of educating children according to UN principles, which are: 1, respecting all member states, and Israel is a member state. You can't say that Israel does not exist and Palestine exists in its state. The second one is that the UN has the principle of peaceful resolution of the Middle East conflict. And UNRWA teaches the resolution of that conflict by war. It negates both things, negate the UN principles. And actually, UNRWA betrays both the mandate of the UN and both its own children, the educated children, because it actually drive them into war and suicide, whatever. And this is also unbelievable to happen in a UN organization.
Can I just ask you, Arnon, your role is translating from the Arabic, if I understand it correctly. Have you seen the content change over years or perhaps decades? Has there been any subtle changes?
Yes. In 2016, they started and actually finished the publication of new, changing all of the school curriculum. And I found out that it was worsening in several points. First point, they stopped calling Israel Israel. They call it the Zionist occupation, which means that instead of a concrete entity, the state of Israel, you fight now, as a Palestinian child, you fight now an evil or mythical evil called world Zionism, which is all evil. Another thing is that they included in the school curriculum praise for ordinary terrorists like Dalal al-Mughrabi and others, and instead of only the heads of terrorist organizations like Fatih Shkakin before that. And the third is that they are actually referring to killing Jews, like exactly, I would say in a story for grade 9, if I'm not mistaken. The story goes that there was a curfew in some place near Ramallah, and the author says that the Jar told him the curfew is not over this neighborhood, it's over the other neighborhood, because there is a barbecue party with Molotov cocktails on a Jewish civilian bus. So the Jews who are burned in the bus is actually a barbecue party. So this is a new item. Another thing is that, as I said before, the return is violent. It's going to take place into liberated Palestine rather than to Israel. And there were some other changes for the worse, actually.
Mm. Okay.
We'll introduce general question time. I just want to show people one more thing. This is some screenshots of interviews done with kids leaving UNRWA schools. And we're not just talking theory here. It has a major effect on their mindset and on their attitudes. They teach us that Jews are terrorists. Stabbing and running over Jews brings dignity to the Palestinians. I hate the Jews. They teach us that the Zionists are our enemies. This boy says, I will ram a car into them. I am ready to stab a Jew. And I've left this one for last. Right now, I am prepared to be a suicide bomber. This is the product of the UNRWA education system that you were just describing, Arnon. It's not just theory in books. It has that effect on people coming out of the education system.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to questions. I see Greg has got his hand up, so I'll ask Greg to unmute himself. Just while he's doing that, I saw there were a few questions in the chat group, which I have sort of scrolled past. You're very welcome to ask the questions yourself. So if you do, just indicate by putting up your hand electronically. To do that, click on the reactions icon on the bottom of the screen, and then we'll see that. So and then we'd be happy for you to ask your question.
Okay, David, how are you? It's Greg here. You look well. After all your hard work for many years, I've got nothing but respect for you. But I want to ask you a couple of questions. With all the money that UNRWA is spending with their sophisticated public relations and blah, 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 what are we doing to counteract that?
That's the name of the game. The name of the game is to try to put in an alternative, and to fight UNRWA not to allow this to happen. Right now, UNRWA and the Palestinian Authority do not allow it to happen. And now inside of Israel, there's different places that I've been involved in Jewish-Arab dialogue, Jewish-Arab education since I came here in 1970. But this is a tough nut to crack, because when you have an official curriculum and informal curriculum, which does not allow this kind of any mention of reconciliation. I mean, what happened was we met with the Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, who told us.
No. But I got to interrupt you for a moment. I got to interrupt you for a moment. These people go to donors and give them a interesting entertainment platform of what their children are doing and why they're children and why they need the money. Correct?
Well, absolutely. Go ahead.
It's a sophisticated PR machine. So what I'm saying to you is, what do we have to counteract that? Why aren't we going to those same very countries, Germany or Sweden or whatever, knock on the door and say, listen, you've given these people a time and a platform to talk about what they're doing. We'd like to highlight something quite different. Can you give us an hour? What's the problem?
Greg, that's precisely what we've been doing. You and I have met about this. We've been in the parliaments of Canada, Sweden, Germany,
but
US.
You're up against a sophisticated machine that are doing it better than you.
So we need, look, if we had the means, we would.
And what are the means?
The means are, look, if we had the opportunity to present a once a month program for each of the ambassadors here in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and for each of the consulate, each of the parliaments, we would do it. Of course, we would.
Tell me, what kind of money you're talking?
Well, we have created several budgets, and I'll be happy to share it with you and with anyone else in terms of what it costs.
Because
basically, what we do, 1 second. Here's what we do: is we bring over someone like Dr. Groiss, and there's at least one Palestinian, maybe two Palestinians we bring with us, who are very, very pleased to talk about peace and very pleased to say this is false and what's going on. But the expenses involved in bringing people over, and the expenses involved in putting, and now the expense we have now to put all this into German, because this is what we discovered. Dr. Groiss and I and Rabbi Cooper of the Wiesenthal Center, we were at the German Parliament, the German Bundestag last year, and we just see there's so much to be done. We have to put the material out in German, and people are willing to listen. That's the optimistic thing that I can say, is that people are willing to listen. Parliamentarians are willing to listen, but the other side there are at least 40 40 organizations promoting the idea that that what's happening here with the Palestinian Authority in education is okay, and we have to counter that. And we're one group. It's not easy.
Happy with
but
that?
We have to stay with it. We have to stay with it, and I'm ready. Our agency is ready to do it as long as we can pay our expenses. Because we have.
To take a guess for a moment, what do you think their public relations bill is annually?
I don't like
$1 million bucks, $2 million. What is it?
They're working on a 1.2. UNRWA works on a $1.2 billion budget, most of which cannot be accounted for. 54% of the money of UNRWA goes into education. However, the money that goes into humanitarian services comes in cash, much of it, and with no accountability. So anyone who says they know where the money is going in UNRWA is telling you telling tales, and it's simply not the case.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Leon. I see he's put his hand up, and I think Roland may want to ask a question after that. So Leon, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, David Bedein. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Now, David, would you agree that appealing to the UN is futile? Would you agree that governments of the donor nations, no matter how enlightened they are, rationalize wrongdoing when it serves their perceived national interests? However, do you think it might be a good idea to focus attention in campaigns on the taxpayers of the donor nations? Those taxpayers pay heavily, particularly in nowadays with what's happening with respect to the recession caused by the pandemic. Would you not say that they would resent very much millions and millions of their tax dollars, being channeled into the UNRWA nefarious activities?
Absolutely, absolutely, and the more we can publicize, the better. Very important, because the fact that there is no accountability for a $1.2 billion budget, I think it's the taxpayers of the donor nations that should be asked that question. That's why I don't recommend knocking it out, because then you don't have the standing with which to critique. But the blessing is that at least 20 major Western nations put money in. Therefore, the Western nations can be asked to look at what happens with the money and what happens with the curriculum, etc.
Okay. Roland, did you have your hand up? Would you like to ask a question? If so, please unmute yourself. No? Okay.
I'm muting myself now, yes. Hi, David. So pleased to see you. I respect you so much. I first met you back in 2015 at the OU Centre in Jerusalem, and met you a few times since then. Last year, towards the end of the year, I was in Jerusalem, in Israel, and I went to Bedein, the UNRWA camp, and I went to Bethlehem, and then I ran into one or two UNRWA officials who were working in Jerusalem at the time. And I found they were Black Africans, wonderful people. They'd been employed by UNRWA or by United Nations to work there. When I spoke to them and spoke to them about the corruption and what was happening, they knew nothing about it. So whilst I fully respect and fully support what you're doing at the international level, but at the ground roots level, I saw that some of the UNRWA officials who were working, who'd been taken across from, in this case, from Africa to work in Jerusalem with UNRWA, had no idea of what was happening with the corruption and what was going on. And I gave them the evidence and spoke with them, but they just didn't know.
Okay,
so my question to you is, I know you're working so wonderfully at the international level, but at the grounds root level within Israel itself, are you meeting with these officials who are brought in by the United Nations and doing their job the best they can, but they just don't know what they're going into?
Roland, you have described what our challenge is, also to educate the Israeli public. Since we can't fly abroad right now, the next 6 months we're going to do everything we can to raise funds to educate the Israeli public about what's going on, because they don't know. Somebody challenged me yesterday and said, it can't possibly be that there's military training in these camps. I sat him down, we were at a coffee shop, pushed the button, and showed our films, which you can see on our site, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. We made 4 films of military preparations in those schools. And we're pressing the button. If someone were to sponsor, by the way, an ongoing advertisement to look at these films we put that in the major Israeli media, that would have an effect. How many people know that Israel is a very small country, that within a few kilometers of Netanya, people are planning to blow up Netanya and to take back their homes. Same thing with Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Beersheba. By the way, one very important thing to understand: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba, these were built on the top of Arab villages, which left between 51 and 53, and the people who live in Gaza have the precise maps of their homes, which they got from those municipalities, and they're ready to take back those homes, and that's why they have the marches on the fence. Most people in Israel don't know why they march on the fence. They know they march on the fence. They don't know why. They don't know the motivation. And how many people know, thanks to our translators, to know that it's not the right of return, but the right of return by force of arms. This is what people have. Right now, they don't know it. The PR, the immense PR system working with the Palestinian Authority presents it as if a bunch of people happen to be demonstrating, happen to be in terrible conditions. Well, it's not happenstance. This is very well planned. And by the way, something which Dr. Groiss can hint at because he's been translating school books of children. This is a child abuse system, abusing children, getting children to become cannon fodder. That's not our conclusion. That's their policy.
Yes, absolutely. Brian is up next, and then Danny.
Thank you, Alan. A question for David. We've seen how effective the United Nations are passing censures against Israel. With the information that you are able to provide to the Israeli ambassador to the various UN forums, and with Palestine Media Watch, I've seen not only movies like yours with primary and secondary kids being trained to hate and to fight, but kindergarten kids playing roles with weapons. Surely this can be shown in the public forum of the UN. And if not, why isn't it happening?
Because we haven't found anyone to pay for it. Simple. We have been at the United Nations Correspondents Association 5 times. We would be there 50 times if we had the budget to do it. Each time we go, we have to raise the money to rent a room, to bring over experts, etc. Happy to do it. If someone were to be, no Jewish organization so far So far, no Jewish organization has been willing to help us out financially. That's why we have to go privately. And I want to say a public thanks to Greg Rosshandler, who 5 years ago he financed one of our best films, which was called UNRWA Goes to War. I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Greg. Fantastic job. One of the few to come through and to put his money where his mouth is. That's the kind of thing we need. There's many pro-Israel organizations, hundreds of them. Find me one that's willing to pay for ongoing forums at the UN, also at the UN here in Israel. UN here in Israel invites us to make presentations, so someone has to pay for it. That's not easy. Again, there's no atmosphere that there's a peace process. No one should disrupt the peace process. Well, we're disrupting it because of truth.
Yes. Danny?
Thank you very much. This has been highly enlightening and very informative, David. I have a couple of questions following on from the last question. First of all, is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel supportive? Are they engaging, wait a second, Dave, are they engaging in active diplomacy in this area? I can tell you down under, that's happened very little. So that's number one. Number two, have you engaged the WZO to enable the Zionist federations around the world to do the same thing? Number three, have you tried to develop something with the World Jewish Congress to do the same thing through the different community bodies around the world who are affiliated with the World Jewish Congress? And following on with each of the different organizations, it needs, you may have done it, but it needs direct engagement with the head of each of those organizations to actually achieve that and for there to be follow through. I've been involved with these organizations and I know how that would operate. And finally, have you attempted to enlist the help of people who are very prominent in the public sphere in pitching arguments? I can't think of anyone better than Dershowitz to be able to pitch this sort of thing. But there are many around, Ambassador Alan Baker, there are many. And all these people need to be frontline soldiers. So the question for you, Alan Freeman, is have you done all these things?
Thanks very much, Danny. Look, I might have to offer to come around and help you tidy up your office there.
I'm very happy with my office because my office is an active office. Okay, so you get off, you and get my wife off my back too. Thank you.
Okay, David or Arnon, would you like to answer Danny's comments and questions?
Until a year ago, the ministry would not help us. I want to be very clear about that. Actually, a year and a half ago, the Foreign Ministry called us in for an official meeting and said, we will work with you. We had only antagonism from the government of Israel until 18 months ago, and it's going higher and it's going very well now in the new Knesset, full cooperation. And I think that's a good thing because they had an attitude that the UNRWA policy shouldn't be challenged. In terms of the World Jewish Congress, the head of the World Jewish Congress has had an ongoing affair with Mahmoud Abbas and praising his attitude to peace. I hope that he changes. What else did you ask? You asked about.
I asked about each of the mainline, the WZO. I didn't mention the Jewish Agency. Look, the reason I mention these organisations is that they have centres all around the world of people who are affiliated.
The WZO is not yet informed that the government of Israel is working closely with us in a nice way. They maintain the old attitude that they shouldn't work with us. I hope that changes. They have a certain department there which deals with anti-Semitism. Yaakov Hagoel, who's very sympathetic to us, but so far, no real cooperation. I can just say that we're hoping that we see more cooperation Again, there's tens of Jewish organizations finding any of them to work with us. There's a certain fear this will disrupt the peace process. Well, the peace process disrupted itself. And that should be the attitude, that the peace process was a nice idea, but it simply was not carried through.
I'd like to help you. I'd like to help you with engaging with these different groups where I can assist you. All right.
Danny, let's stay in touch.
Greg will pay and I'll talk.
Okay. We're running out of time. I think Elaine wants to ask a question, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, David. So the new
Elaine, 1 second. I have to say thank you to Elaine. I was not cove to her today, and she is the best information source we have every morning when I get material from Elaine. I know it's fantastic, 100%, and appreciate it.
Thank you. All is forgiven.
Shkoyach, Elaine. Shkoyach. You do a great job.
Thank you very much. So Matthias Schmel, is he the news director, is he? That came after Chris Guinness? Is that right, David? Matthias Schmel, the director of UNRWA. The new director.
Oh, no, the new director of UNRWA is Mr. Lazzarini, and we put the interview with him. He gave his first interview, which is on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com.
So,
Mr. Chris Guinness was kicked out after he was found to be giving fraudulent material to the world. Go ahead.
I know he cried a lot, unfortunately, didn't he? So, but it's not Matthias Schmel. You don't know. That doesn't mean anything to you, that name, because I've been reading reports about him crying. You know.
Oh, wait a second. The guy in Gaza. Yeah.
He's running the operation, and he's crying. Poor.
It's pronounced differently, but go ahead.
Oh, okay then. So yeah, just recently he was saying that, you know, they've got a great deficit in their budget.
It's very funny with these guys. It's very funny with these guys. They put out a statement on March 15th that they were sitting on $1.2 billion. They got their full budget. 3 weeks later, no money.
Yeah, they're a 1 billion deficit with 400 million promised. But is that true? I mean, is there a lot of cash passing hands? Obviously, that's the way they do it.
UNRWA has an amazing way of operating. As I mentioned, March 15th, they put out a statement that they're sitting on $1.2 billion. 3 weeks later, their PR firms around the world said that they were bereft of resources. I mean, they don't even lie very well.
Okay, look, we've got time for one more very quick question. George, I think you might be the one to wrap it up. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, hi, David. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just wanted to make an observation, which possibly others have made in the past, or maybe not. And the issue of funding came up earlier. UNRWA, of course, is a very, very special organization created when it was in 1949 with a very unique definition. Anyway, it has, with reference to its funding, approximately 5 times the staff of UNHCR, High Commission for Refugees, which deals with all other refugees in the world, versus UNRWA, 5.6 million. So it has about 5 times the staff, and you can find these figures on the UNHCR and UNRWA sites, public information. That's 5 times as much. In addition, UNHCR deals with approximately 86 million refugees and displaced persons around the world. UNRWA, we said, was 5 or 6 million. So you do the division, that's about 13 times by about 5. That's about 50 or 60 or 70 times the funding that the Palestinian refugees under UNRWA get from related to UNHCR. In other words, for all other refugees and displaced persons in the entire world. Are people aware of this? And if so, is this not shocking, to say the least, that each so-called Palestinian refugee, and I use the term loosely, because I do not consider them refugees, but setting that aside, that each Palestinian refugee is worth at least 50 to 60 times as much as each other refugee and displaced person in the world. Surely there's something very odd and bizarre about this. Thank you.
David, what do you think about that?
One very important thing. We have seen UNHCR as an effective organization and UNRWA as an ineffective one. So the logical thing, why not switch one with the other? That can only happen if there's a United Nations General Assembly decision. That will never happen because the United Nations General Assembly will never make a decision which is pro-Israel, which will make it easier for Israel. I don't want to waste, forgive me for, I don't hope I'm not being insulting, but I don't want to waste my time on the UNHCR thing because that will not lead us anything. Let's work on the supervision of their funds. Certainly, if we knew that the funds were going to the children, to the people who live in UNRWA, it would be different. There is no accountability, not for health, not for educational service, not for anything. Right now, we know that the schools are beginning, and they're beginning this week. They're advocating war. Not one donor nation is saying, would you please stop advocating war in a school system run by the United Nations with the name of the United Nations. And what we need is for number one, to put out more material so people will see that UNRWA is not a genuine refugee organization, as Mr. Peters has just pointed out. And number two, to expose the fact that UNRWA should be supervised by the donor nations. And you, coming from Australia, you have an opportunity of a lifetime. You're now swimming in all this information. To ask the foreign minister of the ambassador of Australia sitting in Tel Aviv to look at Dr. Groiss's material. To ask your foreign ministry to look at this material, to evaluate it again. Is this the kind of thing that should be happening? I can tell you that there's a lot of reasonable people in Western countries, and there's no reason why this can't be raised as a clear, generic, not even an Israeli issue. This is a UN accountability issue which can be challenged. And my hope is that the 20 or so people here today will follow this up with individual letters and people who can sponsor activities so that people will know more. Wonderful.
Okay, hopefully so. We're coming to the end. I think, Arnon, did you want to have something? Did you have any other comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, a short one. To be more optimistic, I would say that I had an experience back in 2005 when the Palestinian Authority issued the history book for grade 11 with a chapter on the history of Zionism. And in that chapter, they said, there were 3 lines saying that the protocols of the elders of Zion were the confidential resolutions of the first Zionist Congress. When I issued a report about that in 2005, I got a phone call from the Belgian embassy in Tel Aviv. I mean, the Belgians were part of the financing group of those books. They asked me to send them a photocopy of the page with an English translation, and I did. And 3 months later, the Palestinians issued another book without the 3 lines. However, when I sent somebody to Bethlehem to buy the book, they sold him the old one. So, I mean, it's a game, but it can, I mean, sometimes it can be not a failure for us.
Yeah, okay. On that note, look, I'll hand back to David Adler and he can wrap up the evening, but thank you both for your participation. David, would you like to make a few comments at this point?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Alan. Well, it's been a very interesting evening, and there are a few points that were raised, including during question time, that I can tell you with a reasonably good prediction that there will be questions asked on this material at Senate estimates hearings, which is the mechanism in Parliament House for reviewing Australian expenditure. We have a couple of senators who are interested in the subject who are prepared to ask the questions, and we will draft questions to be asked about Australia's funding of UNRWA. So the last thing I want to do is, as always, is to tell everyone that we don't just want spectators, we want people to support AJA and to do these 3 things that are listed there. If you are not yet following the Facebook page, do so. if you're not yet on our email list, simply send a note to the email address office@jewishassociation.org.au. And if you're not yet a member or haven't made a donation, please consider doing so via the website. And I can foreshadow that the event next week is with a guest, Senator Kimberly Kitchings, from the Labor Party, but she's very on side and has recently joined the group that's known as the Wolverines. So she's interested in foreign policy. She's been part of the group calling out China, and she's often on Sky News with Andrew Bolt.
I can't hear, just wait.
And should be a most interesting guest. So
okay.
That's all I want to say.
All right. On that note, we'll say goodnight.